The Subcommittee on Research and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time, and pursuant to the committee Rule 2E and House Rule 11-2H4, the chair announces that she may postpone for roll call votes. Today we meet to consider the committee print of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015 and H.R. 2886, the Future Transportation Research and Innovation for Prosperity Act. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Now, it was almost 3 months ago that I chaired a hearing in this subcommittee on issues related to surface transportation research and development. The testimony we heard from witnesses at that hearing were helpful to me in crafting the legislation that we have on consideration today. Highlights of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015 include, first, making the reduction of traffic congestion a priority area of research and development within the U.S. Department of Transportation. This area of research is of particular significance, not just to my constituents, but Americans throughout the nation. According to the 2015 Urban Mobility Scorecard, quote, the national congestion recess is over. In the biggest regions and the most congested corridors, traffic jams can occur at any hour, weekdays or weekends. The problem that travelers and shippers face include extra travel time, extra costs from wasted fuel, and lost productivity and increasing unreliability where bad weather, roadwork, a malfunctioning traffic signal, a local event, or a small accident or stalled vehicle can result in major delays and I would add major costs. My constituents certainly can attest to that. The report also discusses how transportation research and technology also saves money and time for families. For example, the scorecard lists Washington, D.C. area as one of the most congested, and drivers spending 82 hours a year stuck in delays. That does not include just their standard travel time. The cost of this congestion also costs drivers to spend an additional $1,834 a year on commuting costs. Better roads and less congestion leads to families spending less time at the pumps, less time in traffic, less on vehicle maintenance, and gets them home faster where they can have more time with their families, be there for homework, the games, and just having quality time. The bill also prioritizes research and development activities within the Department of Transportation. It is important that we identify ways to maintain a healthy, substantive research base for our state and local transportation initiatives. The bill requires the Assistant Secretary for Research and Technology to play a more significant role in the department's research planning and development, and provides direction to make research at the department multimodal, non-duplicative, and transparent. Further, the bill directs the department to study the state of rail safety technologies and identify alternative technologies that can achieve the safety goals of positive train control requirements, but that could potentially be implemented sooner than PTC systems. While by law, PTC technology is required on 60,000 miles of railroad track by the end of the year, many railroads are likely to miss the deadline, and we are dealing with that on the Transportation Committee that Mr. Lipinski and I both serve on. As a representative of a district filled with a diverse group of transportation challenges, and as a member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, we will work to shepherd language from today's bill into the larger surface transportation legislation that Congress will hopefully be able to pass later this year. To that end, I look forward to working with my colleague, Mr. Lipinski, who, as I mentioned, is also a member of the committee. And he is also the author of the other bill on today's agenda. I have no doubt that we'll be both engaged in these discussions. I urge my colleagues to support both bills today so that we may provide the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee with comprehensive research and development language to incorporate into the transportation bill. I now recognize the ranking member of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Transportation is integral to our lives and often evokes as many complaints as the weather. But while we can't change the weather, we can do a better job with our transportation system. Now I've said that, let's please not get into a climate change debate about changing the weather. You all know what I mean. It's not just by building more either that we help to improve our transportation system. Through transportation R&D, we can develop and implement technology that will transform personal mobility and freight movement, allowing us to move people and goods more quickly and more safely. We're living in an exciting time where technology has already begun to increase the efficiency and safety of our transportation systems. And there's great potential for so much more. For that to happen, though, we must make sure that we invest in research today that will unleash the potential and create a better future. The bills and amendments we're considering today will help us do just that. My bill, the Future Transportation Research and Innovation for Prosperity, or Future TRIP Act, is focused on helping new technologies be developed and implemented. For example, the bill sets up a program which would establish priorities for research and deployment of technologies for connected and autonomous vehicles that promise to make commutes safer and more efficient. The consulting firm McKinsey released a study this year showing that automated vehicles could reduce accidents by 90%, which could save tens of thousands of lives, and tens of billions of dollars in property damage every year. Some experts believe that autonomous vehicle technology will allow us to move 4 times as many vehicles efficiently on the same roads we have today. Before we get to autonomous vehicles, though, we need to establish better protocols for vehicles to communicate with each other and with infrastructure around them. This bill will help do that. The bill also establishes a program on freight research, which directs the Department of Transportation to create a strategic research plan to improve efficiency and safety of freight transportation and focus resources on top priorities. Freight transportation is enormously important to the economy, and the volume of freight traffic is expected to grow by 25% in the next 10 years. My district in Chicagoland is a freight hub. While this keeps Chicago's economy running, it also lowers the quality of life for some of us as cars sit in traffic or at railroad grade crossings. Research on freight movement can help boost the economy and make life better in congested areas. When developing this bill, I convened a number of roundtables of experts on transportation technology. One of the experts that joined us was from Peloton Technology, a company that specializes in connecting 2 long-haul cargo trucks by computer so that they can travel within 10 meters of one another. Not only can this save space on the road, but the trucks are more fuel efficient since they draft off one another, averaging an estimated 7% reduction in fuel costs at 65 miles an hour. And because the trucks are linked by wireless communication, both can brake simultaneously, reducing the number of accidents. Research can help bring about more technologies like this and improve coordination and planning across modes of transit. There's many other pieces of the bill, including improvements to University Transportation Centers program, coordination of DOT research with other agencies, and a reauthorization of a pavement technologies deployment program I helped authorize in MAP 21. And the community has been very supportive, with endorsements in whole or part from groups like ITS America and Transportation for America. I ask unanimous consent that a full list of endorsing groups be entered into the record.
Without objection?
I've intentionally made my bill focus on policy matters rather than funding levels because it's easier to come to agreement over policy matters. However, I also believe that we need to increase our investments in transportation as a whole and technology research in particular. While I believe the programs in these bills can be productive in a funding-constrained environment, they'll be much more productive if we can find a long-term fix for our transportation funding problems. I have long sought to find bipartisan agreement on this issue and will continue to do so. I want to thank I'd like to thank Chairwoman Comstock for her bill, which focuses on multimodal research, reducing traffic congestion, and improving rail safety, among other items. I also want to thank the Chairwoman and Chairman Smith for exercising the committee's jurisdiction when it comes to the research title of the Highway and Transit Bill. Like the Chairwoman, I serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, but it's this committee's role to shape our nation's research agenda and help promote technology and innovation that will revolutionize mobility. With that, I look forward to considering the amendments, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, for his opening statement.
Thank you, and I thank Chairwoman Comstock again for holding this markup on surface transportation research and development that helps communities throughout America. When President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, it was hard to imagine the effect it would have on our country. Continuing advances in transportation research and development ensure that federal surface transportation programs will continue to boost the economy and the safety and quality of life in our cities, our suburbs, and our rural communities. High-priority R&D will help create autonomous automobiles and improve crash avoidance and other safety technologies. It also will lead to better roads to allow Americans to navigate our highways more easily and comfortably. Nationally, we can encourage economic growth and job creation if we enhance our transportation infrastructure. This makes the Science Committee's jurisdiction over the research, development, and technology programs at the Department of Transportation particularly relevant. Innovations that result from federal research and development efforts in conjunction with state and local efforts ultimately benefit the constituents we represent in Congress. The two bills being marked up today supplement each other and address some of the most pressing transportation issues our country faces. These include congestion and safety concerns. I also appreciate both bills' focus on next-generation research relative to automated vehicles. Not only will the results of such R&D help mitigate traffic and congestion issues, but they also will help improve technologies focused on safety and crash avoidance. These issues were discussed during the hearing the Research and Technology Subcommittee held in June, which led us to the development of the bills before us today. The significance and value of our efforts is also shared and acknowledged by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which has general jurisdiction over transportation issues. We are fortunate that both the chair and ranking member of this subcommittee, who are the sponsors of today's bills, also sit on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. This provides them and this committee with the opportunity to advance today's bills in the context of the larger transportation authorization bill that Congress is working to enact. I want to thank Chairwoman Comstock and Ranking Member Lipinski for taking the initiative on their bills, and I urge my colleagues to support them. Yield back, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, pursuant to notice, I now call up the committee print of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015. The clerk will report.
Committee print of H.R., a bill to authorize surface transportation research and development programs and for other purposes.
Okay. And without objection, the committee print is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. We will now proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. And the first amendment on the roster is a manager's amendment. The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Mrs. Comstock of Virginia, amendment number 006.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and I recognize myself to explain the amendment. I offer this amendment to make some minor and technical changes to improve the underlying legislation. On this manager's amendment includes changes to Section 9 of the bill relating to the University Transportation Centers program. It identifies the importance of outreach to attract new entrants into the transportation field by highlighting the inclusion of women and underrepresented populations, and emphasizes giving consideration to minority institutions for all UTC grants. The amendment also specifies that the Department of Transportation select the next round of UTC grant recipients by June 1st, 2017, so that institutions of higher education may better plan their application. Thanks to the effort and input from members and staff of this committee, this amendment makes the underlying bill better, and I urge your support for it. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Okay, hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the manager's amendment. All in favor say aye, and those opposed say nay. Aye? Okay. All in favor say aye. Okay. Aye, sorry. I thought we were good. Those opposed say no. Okay, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay, so we're not going to do that. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Hultgren. Does the gentleman wish to be recognized?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay, the clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Mr. Holgren of Illinois, amendment number 036.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for all your work on this legislation. I'd also like to thank the Chairman Emeritus of the Science Committee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his help on this amendment and his longstanding leadership for the safety and rights of motorcyclists. If the federal government is providing grants to improve motorcycle safety, these grants should be focused on ways that actually improve the safety of motorcycle riders. At this time, a number of local governments have accepted grants which call for motorcycle-only checkpoints, and the citations from these checkpoints have little to do with the primary cause of motorcycle-related fatalities, other drivers failing to yield to motorcyclists. I do believe that we can be doing more to improve the safety of motorcyclists on the road, and there are reasonable laws that motorcyclists should all follow. But before the federal government casts down another top-down mandate on local law enforcement officers, we should be sure that we are not wasting valuable police time while singling out and infringing on the rights of law-abiding motorcycle riders, unless there's compelling safety-related reasons for doing so. That's why my amendment calls on DOT to enter into an agreement with the National Academy of Sciences to study the most effective means of preventing motorcycle crashes. This information will be valuable and should then inform the department on the necessity and efficacy of any further motorcycle-only checkpoints, as well as other motorcycle-related safety measures. This should be a common sense amendment, which I urge my colleagues to support, along with the final passage of the bill. I yield back my time.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment, and I'm prepared to accept it. 5 states currently outlaw the practice of motorcycle-only checkpoints: California, Louisiana, Missouri, North Carolina, and my Commonwealth of Virginia. Notably, Illinois has prohibited the use of federal dollars for these checkpoints, and 11 states, including Texas, have prohibited checkpoints by statute and/or judicial action. I commend Mr. Holgren for sponsoring the amendment, and I support it, and I encourage my colleagues to as well. Is there any further discussion of the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Okay, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay, the next amendment on the roster is an amendment also offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holgren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Mr. Holgren of Illinois, amendment number 037.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain this amendment.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and I would again like to thank my good friend from Wisconsin for his leadership on this issue, Mr. Sensenbrenner. This is a common sense amendment which bans the Department of Transportation from lobbying on behalf of new legislation. Taxpayers should not be footing the bill for rent seekers. Taxpayers should not have their money spent so lobbyists can go out and ask the government to go spend more money. This is cronyism and backroom deals at its worst. The people deserve a transparent government that only spends their money in service to the people, not special interests or an ever-expanding self-serving bureaucracy. When you bring this to your constituents back home, they can't believe it's not already the law, and they are rightfully incredulous that this is happening with their tax dollars. This had previously been the law, but when the new administration came in, this was stripped out. This committee also has historic precedence for this amendment, having it as a part of the manager's amendment for H.R. 860 in the 105th Congress. Taxpayer dollars should not be wasted on lobbying. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and final passage of this bill, and I yield back.
Okay, thank you. I support the gentleman's amendment, and federal agencies I don't think should be spending our federal dollars to lobby government employees. This amendment is directed towards preventing advocacy actions, not toward preventing the Department of Transportation from being able to provide information. I support the intent of the amendment to prevent the use of federal funds and urge my colleagues to support it.
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes, I recognize Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not really sure how this amendment is within the purview of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. However, it's before us, so I want to speak on the substance and intent. I don't know if I really disagree with anything that Mr. Holgren said, but I think this amendment goes further than that. Mr. Sensenbrenner introduced similar language into the 1998 Highway Bill, which is still in the code. It reads, quote, "No funds appropriated to the Secretary of Transportation shall be available for any activity specifically designed to urge a state or local legislator to favor or oppose the adoption of any specific legislative proposal pending before any state or local legislative body," unquote. That to me sounds like a lobbying prohibition. Second, I'm sure we're all aware that the Anti-Lobbying Act has been implemented as a blanket prohibition on lobbying federal, state, and local officials by federal agencies and their employees. The fact that these two laws already exist must lead us to question the intent of the amendment before us today. As I read it, the text would prevent not just lobbying, but potentially all communication between federal and state DOT officials on any legislative proposals. There's no exception for sharing expertise between federal and state officials, except through testimony before state legislators. Of course, we know that the overwhelming majority of information we receive as legislators is not through hearings, but through informal communication with outside experts. Moreover, I'd also like to note that the breadth of this amendment, as it appears, that it would cover all modes of the Department of Transportation, which, as we know, includes the FAA, FHWA, FMCSA, PHMSA, FRA, MARAD, and FTA. These are essential safety agencies that interact with officials at all levels of government. As technologies like unmanned aerial systems advance, regulations often proliferate at each level of government, and we need all the expertise we can get to make sure that such efforts are effective and sensible. In Chicago alone, we had over 20 UAS sightings in the vicinity of O'Hare and Midway airspace. This is a real safety issue for commercial and general aviation pilots. And if the city of Chicago or state of Illinois wanted to work on legislation, I think it would be prudent to allow the FAA to communicate with the officials to make sure that the best possible proposals are advanced. And as I mentioned, I think that what Mr. Holcren said, I certainly agree with, but I think we already have in law provisions covering this. I think, unfortunately, this amendment goes farther than that, farther than anti-lobbying. So I think that would have some detrimental impact. Therefore, I'm going to oppose this amendment and urge my colleagues to oppose it also. That I'll yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Holcren. All in favor say, oh, okay.
Madam
Okay,
Chair,
I recognize Congressman Holcren.
thank you. Just very briefly, and I just want to respond and make sure that people do understand. There is a exception in here, clearly in my amendment. It accepts that it does not prevent officers or employees of the United States or its departments or agencies from communicating with members of Congress on the request of any member of Congress or to Congress through the proper channels, requesting, requests for legislation or appropriations which they deem necessary for the efficient conduct of the public business. So there is still protection there, but I understand if people have a different opinion on this, but I think it is important that there not be lobbying, but we allow communication still to continue. I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Lipinski?
I understand that there is the exception for members of Congress. My concern is for state and local legislators and their ability to communicate with federal agencies for information. And that's where my concern arises. If we had an exception there also, then maybe this we wouldn't have those. We wouldn't have a problem with the amendment. With that, I'll yield back.
Okay. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Okay, hearing none, the question is now on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Holcren. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
Okay. Okay, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Chairwoman,
Mr. Lipinski?
request a recorded vote.
Okay. Pursuant to committee rules, a recorded vote on the Holcren amendment will be postponed until as we go through the other amendments. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. Estee. Does the gentlewoman wish to be recognized?
I do, thank you.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Ms. Estee of Connecticut, amendment number 051.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Corrosion causes more than $22.6 billion in damages to America's transportation system every year. On our highways alone, more than 87,000 bridges are structurally deficient because of corrosion. This is unacceptable, and it is preventable. My amendment addresses corrosion's dangerous and expensive consequences by directing the Department of Transportation to include corrosion prevention research in their studies. Specifically, my amendment directs the DOT to consider corrosion prevention research in the Highway Research and Development Program's research on infrastructure integrity, as well as the department's railway safety research. I serve as the co-chair of the Congressional Corrosion Prevention Caucus with my friend and colleague, Representative Pete Olson, and we have heard from businesses, state and local leaders from across the country about the time and productivity they lose because of our aging roadways, bridges, and rails. Our bridges are literally crumbling, and we must update our infrastructure. And I speak as a fellow member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we get documented this deficit every single week. But when we do spend taxpayer dollars to update those bridges and rails, we should stretch those dollars by ensuring that we are using the best corrosion prevention technology to extend the lifespan of that infrastructure. And we must prioritize corrosion prevention efforts to ensure that millions of Americans who travel on our roads and railways every day are safe. In short, corrosion prevention saves money and it saves lives. I urge all my colleagues to support this simple common sense amendment. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
I thank the gentlewoman for her amendment, and I'm prepared to accept it. I think this is an important amendment that highlights a critical issue nationwide, bridge safety. We have significant backlogs of overdue maintenance, given that tens of thousands of U.S. bridges are deemed structurally deficient. For example, I know I share my constituents' concern that a survey has identified 14 structurally deficient bridges in and around the nation's capital, including the Memorial Bridge, which I'm sure is familiar to all of us, and many of you have probably seen those pictures. I support this amendment and urge my colleagues to support it as well. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Ms. Estee. All in favor, say aye. 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 Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko. Does the gentleman wish to be recognized?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Mr. Tonko of New York, amendment number 020.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. More hazardous materials are being transported across our country than ever before. The crude by rail industry has gone from virtually non-existent before 2009 to 500,000 carloads last year. Similar shipment increases have occurred with other Class 3 flammable liquids, including ethanol. Even with commodity shipments and the price of oil down this year, we continue to see unit trains, often comprised of more than 100 carloads, moving crude oil around the country. This challenge is not going away. I am sure many members and your constituents have grown accustomed to seeing tank cars rolling through their districts. That has been the case in New York's capital region, which I represent, which is more than 1,500 miles from the Bakken region. Albany, New York has become the major hub on the East Coast for energy transportation. An estimated 40,000 carloads of crude oil were processed at the Port of Albany in 2013, where 2 terminals are approved to process 2.8 billion gallons of crude annually. Hazardous materials are shipped through the Mohawk River Valley to major rail yards in the area or the Port of Albany, and then moved either south via barge or rail along the Hudson River, or north via rail to Canada en route to refinement facilities, passing by residential and commercial neighborhoods and environmentally sensitive areas along the way. And with these new shipments, local first responders and emergency planners have needed new training to be prepared, and with good reason. We have seen the damage that can be done if there is indeed an accident. In the past 2 years, there have been a number of high-profile and devastating incidents all over our country, including Castleton, North Dakota, Lynchburg, Virginia, Mount Carbon, West Virginia, and Galena, Illinois, to name a few. And in July of 2013, a derailment and explosion in La Magantique, Quebec, resulted in 47 deaths and incredible destruction. These derailments cause spills, explosions, and fires that often burn for days. DOT officials have worked with stakeholders to understand better the risks of shipping hazardous materials and the best policies to mitigate those risks. But moving forward, as those policies are implemented, we should make sure that they are backed by sound interagency research. This problem goes beyond the Department of Transportation, which is why this amendment would allow a coordinated effort with DOT, NIST, DHS, and DOE. The amendment would allow the Secretary of Transportation to conduct cooperative research and enter into an agreement with the national academies to support that research. This industry is still in its early stages, and it deserves our continued attention. We should not assume the recent DOT rule will suddenly remove the risks of moving hazardous materials. We must continue to find new techniques, new materials, and new equipment to keep our communities safe. The risks posed by shipping hazardous materials are varied, but we know more research must be done on cargo packaging and handling, shipment classification, information exchange with first responders, and emergency planning, amongst other topics. We must continue to research ways to mitigate the devastating and potentially fatal consequences of derailments, spills, and explosions involving hazardous materials. This amendment also enables web-based training when deemed appropriate for emergency responders. Currently, the Secretary of Transportation is required to maintain and update a curriculum of courses necessary to train our public sector emergency response and preparedness teams in matters relating to the transportation of hazardous materials. In order to improve the effectiveness of this training, the Secretary should have the authority to include online education when it is determined to be sufficient. I understand that there are a wide variety of views on the new high-hazard flammable train rule and the growth of the crude by rail industry, but I'm not asking for us to find an agreement on those issues. I just want to make sure that the appropriate federal agencies are coordinating on the necessary research to keep our communities prepared and improve the effectiveness of first responders in the event of a spill or derailment involving hazardous materials. Our first responders deserve to know that we are continuing to invest in that research that will get them the information, training, and equipment that could save their lives or their communities. I appreciate the majority's willingness to work with us to fine-tune this language, and I hope we can continue this conversation moving forward to ensure that the Department of Transportation has all of its tools, authorities, and funding necessary to carry out this critical research program. With that, I thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment, and we are accepting it, as he mentioned, and I accept his willingness to work with us on making this a bipartisan amendment for important research regarding the transportation of hazardous materials and making it easier for emergency responders to participate in web-based training. I support this amendment and urge my colleagues to do so also. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Tonko. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Now, the final amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark. Does the gentlewoman wish to be recognized?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment to the committee print offered by Ms. Clark of Massachusetts, amendment number 001.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, And the gentlewoman is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. My amendment requires the Assistant Secretary for Transportation for Research and Technology to study how cities are using technology and data to reduce congestion, improve city services, and generally improve the quality of life of their residents. Within 18 months of this Act's passage, the Assistant Secretary would be required to publish a report on how cities are adopting digital and information technologies and what future infrastructure and planning needs they will face. It will also include best practices on the use of technology and data so we can help local officials implement policies to benefit their own communities, local economies, and the environment. Cities that use data and technology to coordinate services are called smart cities, and their efforts are only becoming more important. In the United States, over 80% of Americans live in urban areas, and cities continue to grow faster than the country as a whole. Texas A&M's Transportation Institute just released its 2015 Urban Mobility Scorecard that found that congestion caused urban Americans to travel an extra 6.9 billion hours and purchase an extra 3.1 billion gallons of fuel in 2014. That adds up to an estimated congestion cost of $160 billion. In light of the large population living in cities and the costs associated with congestion and inefficiency, it is essential that we understand how to maximize our resources. This amendment can do just that. By understanding how cities are using information gathered by new technology to improve services, we can help communities become more efficient, healthier, and more supportive of a growing economy. Identical language passed the Senate in July, and it is also included in Ranking Member Johnson's Connected Transportation Research and Innovation Act. This study will be an important step in understanding how we can use technology to improve the quality of city life, save money, and continue to build on existing efforts. It is my understanding, however, that the majority has concerns with this amendment, and in light of that, I am willing to withdraw it. But as I do, I'd like to express my hope to the chairwoman that our staffs can work together to find a way forward on language to support smart cities as this bill moves to the full committee and to the House floor. With that, I ask for unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn, and I thank the gentlewoman for withdrawing her amendment, and I appreciate the issues that she has highlighted, and we'll continue to work on these issues on any number of fronts. Now, let's see. Okay. Now, as we have a pending vote on an amendment to the committee print, we will postpone further proceedings on that and move to consideration of Mr. Lipinski's bill. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 2886, the Future Transportation Research and Innovation for Prosperity Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 2886, to direct the Secretary of Transportation to establish an automated and connected automated and connected vehicle research initiative and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. We will now proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Lipinski. Does the gentleman wish to be recognized?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 2886, offered by Mr. Lipinski of Illinois, amendment number 039.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This amendment is meant to make a number of technical and conforming changes based on feedback that I received from stakeholders after the bill was introduced. I want to once again thank everyone who helped work to put this bill together. I ask the members of the subcommittee to support this amendment, and I'll yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself to speak on the amendment. I would like to thank the ranking member for his work and passion on the issues before us today. I appreciate your introduction of the Future Trip Act, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, I look forward to working with you in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where we will hopefully pass a comprehensive surface transportation bill later this year that includes our efforts here today. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting your amendment, and I yield back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Lipinski. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Okay, if there are no further amendments and a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Subcommittee on Research and Technology report H.R. 2886 to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology as amended, with the recommendation that the bill pass. The question is on favorably reporting H.R. 2886 to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is reported favorably. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. H.R. 2886 is ordered reported to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes, and without objection, so ordered. Okay, now we are going back to the Hultgren Amendment, and the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are those opposed? No? Okay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Comstock.
Aye.
Mrs. Comstock votes aye. Mr. Molinar. Aye. Mr. Molinar votes aye. Mr. Lucas. Aye. Mr. Lucas votes aye. Mr. McCall. Mr. Hultgren. Aye. Mr. Hultgren votes aye. Mr. Westerman. Aye. Mr. Westerman votes aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Palmer. Aye. Mr. Palmer votes aye. Mr. Abraham. Aye. Mr. Abraham votes aye. Mr. Lipinski.
No.
Mr. Lipinski votes nay. Ms. Esty. No. Ms. Esty votes nay. Ms. Clark. Ms. Clark votes nay. Mr. Tonko. Mr. Tonko votes nay. Ms. Bonamici. Ms. Bonamici votes nay. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Swalwell votes nay.
The clerk will report the tally.
Madam Chairwoman, 7 members voted aye, 6 members voted nay.
The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. If there are no further amendments and a reporting quorum being present, I move that the Subcommittee on Research and Technology report the committee print of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015 to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology as amended, with the recommendation that the committee print do pass. The question is on favorably reporting the committee print of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015 to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The committee print of the Surface Transportation Research and Development Act of 2015 is ordered reported to the full Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. I ask unanimous consent that staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes. Without objection, so ordered. Okay. So that finishes up our work today, and thank you very much, everybody, and we are adjourned.